My son was kidnapped back in 1999. He came home yesterday, and I wish they found him dead. Back in 1999, my son Levi was taken from his room in the middle of the night. My wife Kelsey and I were sitting downstairs watching television when my son's scream rattled the entire house. It was a sound that I continue to hear every minute of every day. When we ran into his room, everything appeared to be normal. There wasn't even a single wrinkle on his bedspread. The only thing missing was him. Shortly after, life became a living hell. The authorities questioned us relentlessly about his disappearance, and I don't blame them for their ruthless persistence. What had happened simply couldn't be explained, and if I were the detectives, I would have thought my wife and I did it too. That's what the rest of the community thought. The mystery surrounding the case drove me insane. Every day we had reporters beating down our doors demanding answers about my son's disappearance. Having those vultures swarm my home enlightened me to a definition of hate that I did not understand, a hate so pure that murder was constantly on my mind. Everywhere I turned, stories of my son were painted across the front pages of local news outlets, Levi's name printed in bold. The Town Gazette constantly printed pictures of Kelsey and I, wet with tears at our absolute worst, tossing them on the porches of every home in our community. I couldn't escape. The agony of the situation slowly tore my marriage apart. Kelsey left her job and never went back. Her full-time gig became spending her days crying on the couch. It was harrowing. As for me, I would be a liar if I didn't say I became acquainted with the taste of gunmetal on a few occasions. Every day felt like my heart was being trampled, squeezed in a vice, and robbing me of my oxygen. Life was miserable. Misery was life. The depression that painted the walls of our house quickly seeped into our pores, causing routine fights between my wife and I. We were each other's safety nets, but we began taking every opportunity we could to take a razor to the webbing. At first the fights were monthly, then weekly, until the screaming and vicious altercations became a daily event. When we decided to separate, my world imploded. Kelsey was my everything. The love for one another ran so deep, but my son's disappearance proved to be enough heat to dry up the well. For a while, we spoke on the phone every now and then, always a great conversation, but when we discussed the possibility of getting together, we both agreed the encounter would resurface far too much pain. Somewhere inside of me there is still love for her, and I frequently fantasize about us being together again one day. After some time, the calls became less frequent. I haven't heard from her in years. Although the memories of Levi's disappearance and my failed marriage continued to find their way through the locked doors in my mind, I allowed myself to enjoy life again. The gray veil that had been cast over my days was slowing, allowing the brilliant and bright colors to shine through. My mental health was trending upward, and smiles and laughter were reintroducing themselves into my life. Living had once again become a pleasurable experience. Yesterday evening, I was enjoying my evening at home, cooking myself dinner, and blasting music throughout the house. Music always made home feel less empty. Through the sounds of the bass rattling the walls, the pattering from the kitchen, and my loud, clumsy feet dancing across the hardwood, I thought I heard a knock at the door. I turned down the music and looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:30 and already pitch black. I stopped my breathing to listen in closely. The knocking rattled the door once more. I'll be the first to admit that when an unsolicited knocker comes to my door, I immediately turn into a wimp and go into hiding. A grown man cowering behind his kitchen counter, afraid of the knock at the door. What a sight. I patiently waited while crouched down on my kitchen floor, hoping to hear nothing but silence. When the doorbell rang, I recoiled, my heart unsure if it wanted to continue beating. Waiting it out until the person on the other side went away was no longer an option. The rapping became quicker and louder, my heart beating in synchrony with the rapid knocks. The knocks turned into pounding, causing the keys hung next to the door to rattle and decor on the shelf to shift. I thought the door was about to blow off its hinges. I grabbed my chef's knife, stuck it between my belt, and swallowed my anxiety. I ran toward the door with such ferocity, ready to attack whatever was on the other side. I put my hand on the doorknob and felt the energy from the other side transfer into my bloodstream and pulsate behind my eyes. When I opened the door, I felt the heat from my body get sucked out through my feet and into the ground. My skin was instantly chilled by the cool streams of sweat pouring from every pore, dampening my clothes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't feel. On the other side of the door was my son. He hadn't aged a day. I am unsure if there is a word for simultaneously feeling confused, terrified, nauseous, dizzy, weak, sad, and surprised. The sight of my son had me feeling insane. My vision began to blur, only having his pupils in my focus. Everything around his eyes was total darkness. My knees trembled and my balance began to shift. The last thing I remembered after opening the door was Levi reaching for me as I fell backwards and the buzzing between my ears as my head struck the floor. When I came to, I was already sitting up. The room felt like it was floating on water as I tried to get to my feet with great difficulty, using my sea legs to regain balance. The terrible pain in my head convinced me my brain was trying to break free from my skull. The smell of burning food crawled through my nose. As the room began to level out, I called for my son's name. Silence. It all felt so real, but then again, so does insanity. There was just no way, no explanation. It had been nearly 25 years since I last saw him, and there he was, at my door, with the fairest of skin, baby fat still filling out his cheeks, beautifully blue and large eyes that his face had yet to grow into. It was my baby boy. One foot in front of the other, walking an invisible tightrope in my concussed state, I went from room to room searching for him. Each time I called Levi's name, and for each room I found empty, insanity became a much more plausible answer. I walked upstairs, careful not to fall back down the way I came, and headed down the hall. His bedroom door was open. I stood outside his room staring into the darkness, too afraid to walk inside. I was terrified at the thought of walking into another empty room, accepting that my mind was slipping, but equally terrified of finding him sleeping soundly in his bed. Until that point, I had not gone inside Levi's room for 20 years. The last time I paid his room a visit, I didn't leave his bed for 3 days after learning that memory lane didn't always have paved roads and sunny skies. As I opened the door with my breath held tight, the light from the hallway cast itself onto the back of his head lying peacefully in bed. I sat down gently on the side of his bed, my aged knees cracking as I sunk into the mattress. The sound of Levi's breathing tugged on emotions I didn't know I had. I placed my hand on his back to feel the heartbeat of a life I thought I had lost. What I knew about religion, God, science, reality, it had all been twisted and flipped upside down when he showed up at my door. All I could do in that moment was stare at my 30-year-old son, tucked into his faded race car sheets, wearing the same pajamas as the night he disappeared. The light from the hallway began to fade as the sunlight from the window progressively brightened the room. Throughout the entire night, I sat there watching my son with marvel. I had no idea what to do. What could I do? Nothing about what happened that night was normal. I took my phone from my pocket. It was the first time throughout the night I took my eyes off Levi. I scrolled through my contacts until I saw Kelsey's name. Attached to her contact info was a picture of her from right after she had Levi. I looked at her picture, hand on my forehead, wondering what her face would look like as I told her Levi was laying in bed right next to me. I wondered how she had aged throughout the years and what kind of person she had become. I wondered what life would have been like today if Levi had never disappeared. My thumb hovered over the dial button with paralysis. I had no idea what to say. There was no way to dress up the words to explain that our son had returned. We hadn't spoken in years, and I was about to give her a call and say what? Hey Kelsey, how have things been? Oh yeah. Oh, and by the way, our son came home. Yeah right. There was no plan, no perfect speech to give. I pressed the dial button. No answer. I took a picture of Levi sleeping in bed and sent it to Kelsey. I have no explanation, but Levi came back. Please call me. Laying at the foot of Levi's bed waiting for her call, my eyes became heavy. I began fading in and out, and right as I was about to cross over into unconsciousness, that's when I heard the whisper. Don't call mommy, he said. A loud crash came from downstairs. Levi was gone.